Hello, everybody. Welcome back. And we're here to discuss Syria. And I have some very informed people with me to do this discussion. Of course, there is Sandeep Unnithan, defense expert, author, great guy, great insights, very seasoned, very sober, knows how to use a gun. So, Abhijit, be careful. And then there is Professor Sengupta, who for some reason thinks he's an expert on Syria. We'll find out soon enough. And finally, there's Tokus Teramu, someone inspired by Rahul Gandhi today. And that is our friend Abhijit Iyer Mitra, AIM, who claims to be an expert on everything. So that's our panel. And let's start. So
The
basically, what's
jealousy, the
happening?
jealousy.
Assad regime has essentially fallen after 13 years of a civil war, and there is a new sheriff in town, so to speak, which is HTS. And they were originally associated with the Al Nusra faction of Al Qaeda. Their leader right now, Jolani, was the number two in ISIS. Since then, he's had a makeover or a exchange in brand, and now they're saying that this is a new reformed HTS, which is going to be good to minorities. It's going to be good to the Alawites and the Druze and all of those people. The Americans are ecstatic. Joe Biden is saying, look at what I've done with just a few weeks to go in office. This is what I've brought to the world. So, is there reason to be ecstatic about this, or are we heading for a gentrification of sorts of ISIS? So, that's what this conversation is really going to be about. Have the black flags returned to Damascus? Let's start with you, Sandeep Unnithan. How are you viewing this? Is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it something we should be wary of?
You mean the entire the airbrushing of Jolani and projecting him as the new big thing, the Morsi of Syria and the Time Magazine Person of the Year, Nobel Peace Prize laureate in the waiting, all of those. Yeah, I think we're headed in that direction, Advaita. I'm not really surprised. The how this guy
Yeah.
has come out like a messiah. It's almost like Dune Part 3, the movie that this guy is planning to make. And Dune isn't shot very far from Syria. I think it's shot in Jordan. So I think this is Dune Part 3. The script is being written as we speak, that this country that's in chaos, and you have Jolani, who's the liberator, the messiah, who's emerged from the deserts, and he shall lead Syria to a new dawn. But that new dawn, as you mentioned, Advaita, is full of black flags. And if it
Yeah.
walks like a duck, and if it quacks like a, if it walks like a jihadi, it quacks like a jihadi, it looks like a jihadi, then it is a jihadi. And that is what Jolani essentially is. You can't change the basic character of the guy. You may get him to change his headdress and his
Exactly.
uniform, and you may ask him to abandon his robes and wear a Zelensky kind of green outfit and all that. But I think at the core, he hasn't changed one bit. He is still the ISIS, the Al Qaeda guy that he always was. So a narrative is being created to project Jolani as the Messiah, and the Syrian Arab republic that we know it no longer exists. In fact, it never existed for a long time. For about 13 years, it was literally hanging, on the support of Iran and the Russian Federation. And the minute these two sponsors kind of lost interest and they had their own battles to fight, the Syrian regime just collapsed like a
Ah,
pack of cards. And one last thing, Advaita, if I might add before you move on to my other esteemed panelists, is the fact that Syria is the only place
esteemed
possibly on
panel.
earth where you have the army, militaries of Russia, the United States, Turkey, and Israel all operating at the same time. So if there are four extraterritorial forces who are already there inside, present and fighting, some of them are actively fighting and bombing. Syria, as a country that we once knew it pre 2011, has ceased to exist. Now, what you're looking at is a patchwork quilt of little a Kurdish Syria, HTS Syria, Syrian National Army Syria. It's all divided, and it's going back to the Syria of 1922 after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. With the mandated Syria, that's where we are today.
Abhijit, they've also given Jolani this sort of Zelensky-esque makeover. I think he's a CIA asset. That's just my take of it. But what are you making of this? Like, is he going to stick to being this inclusive leader who feels that everyone has a stake and everyone has a place in Syria?
Look, there are more chances of me turning straight than there are of Jolani turning inclusive. Dead serious. This fellow's been a whack job since he was in college, if you read his bio. This is a man who's beheaded people. Okay. True, a lot of freedom fighters start violent and turn peaceful and all of that. I'm not willing to believe Jolani is. In fact, given the situation in Syria, the political responses required are in fact extremely harsh ones. If you think everybody's going to start holding hands and singing Kumbaya one fine day, and you can turn into this great Democrat who's going to have an elected parliament, you can forget about it. Especially, ravaged, devastated societies don't come back together all that easily, number one. So even assume he's turned into this bleeding heart liberal. But if he has, he's not going to last long out there. Let's be clear about this. Second, there are too many factions involved in all of this. And all those factions are still extremely powerful, including the Alawites, by the way. So they will jostle for space and things have to happen. The problem here is, almost 3/4 of all interstate conflicts end sort of very with disengagement, with a negotiated settlement. Less than 1/4 of all civil wars ever end in a negotiated settlement. They usually end in complete collapse. Okay. And what ends up happening is this is pretty much a case of a lack of credibility. So, for example, if Assad had said, I forgive everyone, come back and let's build this country, HTS, Nusra, the Kurds, they had no belief that Assad wouldn't throw them in jail later on. Okay. And the problem there is, therefore, because after they've laid out their arms, Assad has no incentive to keep to his promises. Similarly, on the other side, what ends up happening is if you have this Al-Nusra, I'm going to call it Al-Nusra, I mean, call it HTS if you want, I'm going to call it Nusra, ISIS, whatever. The belief that, that these are separate organizations, this is the Pakistani playbook. We're meant to believe that JKLF was separate and Hizbul Mujahideen was separate and Jaish-e-Mohammed was separate and all of that, all codswallop. They're all the same damn thing, controlled by the same damn people. But anyway, now, if they had promised Assad some kind of political accommodation and whatever, after they come to power, they had no incentive to keep it as well, because Assad would then be disarmed. So it reaches a sort of point like this where nobody is willing to give. The incentives for giving don't exist. And that is why less than 1/4 of all these civil wars ever end with an agreement. So the collapse had to happen. I did not expect that Assad was going to be the one to collapse. And certainly not this rapidly. They've literally captured Syria in the space of about 10 to 12 days, which is faster than Afghanistan. It was faster than Libya. It was faster than anything else. Anyway,
so how did that happen?
It is, we don't know, because the Americans aren't giving us any satellite imagery. For the last 10, 12 days, we have only been able to beg for satellite imagery. We're given very carefully curated satellite imagery. You can task any satellite to do it. They're not going to give you the imagery because they're all controlled by the West and they send out these things. So, for example, Ukraine, after the initial week or 2 weeks, we were not able to see any satellite imagery from there, which is the same thing that's happened now. We can't see any satellite imagery.
Yeah.
But I want to be very clear about this. The Russians did try to defend. When they broke out, see, there are two axes out here that they've broken out of. One is Idlib from the north, which is the Turkish supported guys. The other has actually been from the east, from the American base in Jordan, supported by American air power, in fact. Right, we can't confirm that. We've seen some unverified videos of American fighters helping them, aircraft helping them. But the Russians tried in the northern offensive to stop. The problem was the Syrian Arab army, the government army, wasn't willing to fight. They were just throwing up their arms and running away. Now, why these morale collapses, they're impossible to predict. See, in Afghanistan, it was not a collapse of morale. It was a predetermined deal where we had satellite imagery. We could see commanders go out, leave their tanks in the field, literally pretend to fight, and then run away. Here, I don't believe there's been a deal. There may have been, but I don't believe there has. And they've just run away, and we can't see the imagery. So we can't even see if it was a preset pattern of fake conflict. Of course, not everybody gets the note. So some of the conflicts in Afghanistan were actually real. But that's that.
Yeah. Professor, what do you make of Erdogan's role in this? You know, they're saying that Turkey has played... because I'm going by the sequence in which people were here. So you'll come after Professor. And then last will be Sandeep Ghose. So, Professor, you know, what is Turkey's role been? Because Iran is accusing them of being diabolical. Go ahead.
Before I come to Erdogan's role, I think I have to basically say something about what Abhijit said. I think this was negotiated. In fact, Iranian statements also make it clear that they were unaware, they did not expect Assad to give up fighting. They had told Assad that they would send troops if he wanted to fight. Apparently, Assad trusted the Russians more on advice on this particular front than he did the Iranians. And therefore, the Russians apparently told him, look, it's all over, we can't help you that much. And therefore, he decided to leave. Now, you know, this entire system is like Afghanistan Part 1 in 1996. With differences. There, Najibullah tried to negotiate, but he was not allowed to leave. Here, Assad was allowed to leave, number one. Number two, you know, there is no fight for Kabul between the various factions of the Mujahideen or the various factions of the Syrian opposition. If you look at the various oppositions, they are more or less satisfied where they are.
Correct.
The Kurds and their allies are pretty happy in the north. The Turks are not happy with their presence. The Druze and their allies are happy with Syria in southern Syria. Israelis are also very happy because that's a buffer state between them and the more extremist Syrian opposition. And there are other factions also. So Al-Nusra has taken over Damascus. What has happened? He's basically first he promised that, you know, before we establish Islamic State, we'll have to talk to all stakeholders. But he's also said that the Alawites must give up their practices which are contrary to the practice of Islam. Otherwise, they'll be badly treated. Now, so what will happen is, I think, will be localized. I think if the HTS tries to spread its wings across Syria, they will be met with concerted opposition. So I have a feeling that this particular coalition will not be like Afghanistan 1996, where everybody wanted to fight for Kabul. Turning to Erdogan's role, I think for Erdogan, this is possibly the best of a bad situation. He would have liked to see the elimination of the Kurds totally. The Americans on a perfect day would have liked the Kurds basically to come in and be more. But that is not acceptable to the Turks. The Turks would be far more comfortable with a variant of Al-Qaeda coming in. After all, they initially financed these guys. With them coming in, and the Americans were pretty happy enough to play with that. Now, there has been a makeover. So he has been interviewed. Now, how do you feel about your previous role when you were in Al-Qaeda, in ISIS? He said, look, yes, I've killed people, but you know, I was young. You learn from those experiences and so on and so forth. So a makeover is going on, but I think given the circumstances, I could not have thought anything, you know, you cannot think anything better for Syria. Assad could not have survived. He's basically whittled down his own position to such an extent that his support had become extremely microscopic. And once the will of the Syrian army to defend him ran out, I think he did the best thing possible.
Okay. He did the best thing possible. Turkey actually backs the Syrian National Army, so to speak. That's who their front is. Sohail, you wanted to interject? Please go ahead.
So this is the most calibrated, pre-negotiated strategy that has taken place. So let me explain how. When Assad fled the country, the first news that came out, which was again manipulated and calibrated, was that his plane has crashed. People
Correct.
were conjecturing whether he'd gone to Tehran or whether he'd gone to Russia, but Russia then said that yes, he has. Number one. Number two, Assad, before leaving, told some jokers there that please have a peaceful transition. The prime minister is being taken out as he's going to Haldiram. So it's all a calibrated, very carefully manipulated response. A. B. Everyone
Hmm.
has to gain from Assad's ouster. Russia, by giving him asylum, will now bargain for their bases. America has already started bombing some ISIS hideouts. America will bargain for its bases. It is going to be a confederation which will be running amok. A. B. There is no sense of governance there. People on the BBC here and other channels are saying, how do people who are of Syrian descent even go back to Syria? Because no one knows who's in charge. So there's complete chaos. Third, did you see the way people even went to the palace? It was like you going to your house and moving furniture around. It wasn't as if there was anger and let's burn the place down. Nothing of that sort. So I believe it is something that all parties, including Assad, agreed to.
Yes.
Number one. Number two, Americans are scoundrels. They know exactly when to pull the plug. I think Assad realized that when the Americans pulled the plug, Iran was already distracted. There was no way that he could have survived. Rather than die like Gaddafi and what's that other fellow who was your friend here? That Iraqi chap, Saddam. Saddam was a great pal of
Saddam.
advisors. They used to go on holiday together, zip lining and all that. So anyway, he didn't want to meet that fate. His wife, with 3 kids, had already left for Russia 4 days before this. So I mean, it's like Advaita, you taking a walk in Lodi Gardens and telling other people to look after your cat. So you walked out, but everyone will be in place. So I genuinely believe that this is calibrated, planned, pre-negotiated. Now, Abhijit is an expert on Israel. You tell me, Netanyahu reaches
Hmm.
Golan Heights. The Israeli army reaches Golan Heights within a matter of 6 hours when they're already distracted with Gaza. So I think it was a pre planned exercise. All the parties knew what role they had to play, and they played it adroitly. And finally, this was Biden's way of saying, oh, see, I prevented. Now, Trump had already said before that this is not our war and we should not do anything we should not get involved. So everyone had basically thrown their hands up in the air or moved out from the battleground, as it were.
Hmm.
Thank you, Advaita, and thank you, my
Yeah.
dear panelists. And on that note, I must return to my siesta. God bless you, and may God continue to bless Syria.
Esteemed panelists, please maintain the decorum set by the other Sandeep on the show.
Who's the other
First time
Sandeep?
anybody has called. You,
Unnithan.
the other Sandeep, the only other gentleman in the show. Yeah.
No, I
The
thought
only
you're the other
gentleman.
Sandeep. He is the Sandeep. I thought you were being
See,
self-deprecatory and calling
Oh,
yourself the other
see,
Sandeep.
it's Sandeep and
okay.
Shondeep. This isn't Sandeep, it's Shondeep.
बस जब तक
The-
तुम साला सीमेंट बेच रहा था उस टाइम से हम लोग डिबेटिंग कर रहे हैं ठीक है never teach your father how to suck eggs boss never Advaita God bless you and may God continue to bless Syria okay
Yeah.
thank you
Thanks for joining.
Bye.
Anyway, I have
He
joined as a
trolls
listener
and
really
trolls
today.
on the comment section till he is let into the conversation. Otherwise, he would have trolled us for the next I don't know how long. So the only thing was to let him in for a bit and then let him go. Okay, Sandeep, over to you.
No, I said I've come here more as a listener to get educated from knowledgeable people. My only question would be to Abhijit and the Sandeep, is that what will some of our liberal Indians do who were pro-Palestine and anti-Israel? Now they are celebrating this whole Syrian business. What will be their, or for that matter, India's stand, or what we were talking of yesterday? How does it really affect us in the current scenario, with so much happening in our neighborhood also, where we believe the Islamic State has some kind of influence, if not hand, playing out? So that would be my question, Advaita, if I were to take the
Sure,
liberty of
sure. So
asking them
Sandeep, you want to
on
take
your
that?
behalf.
No, Sandeep, so my biggest worry about Syria is that you remember when ISIS started there in 2014, it was like they'd set up this gigantic transmitter for propagating violent Islamic fundamentalism, and they were attracting all manner of whack jobs from all across the world. So it had become like a beacon for all of these guys who were, literally moving with their families and, traveling there to Syria, and that lasted about 5 or 6 years. Of course, it collapsed pretty quickly. But my worry is that if this happens again, this is going to give huge impetus for the Sunni fundamentalism that had actually been in kind of control, because you had the Shia guys under control, right? You had the Shia super state right from Syria right up to Iran that was holding Sunni fundamentalism at bay. But now the balance has been kind of disrupted. The
Yeah.
kind of come to just Iraq and Iran, and they've lost Syria altogether. And so my biggest worry is this fact that this could become a base once again for violent Sunni fundamentalism. That is number one. And of course, it doesn't really affect us that much, apart from the fact that this thing of becoming another Afghanistan, from where you will have these terrorists from all over the world sitting there and planning global mayhem. This United Jihad fundamentalist setup of United Nations of jihad fighters going there and figuring out how we can attack cities and from India to Europe to North America and all of that. So I think that is the biggest concern, that this could become a refuge for these kind of people. So Syria, as we know it, has ceased to exist. And as Professor Dipankar was saying, the fact that there are no factions currently with the kind of power that it requires to break together that country, bring that country together. Nobody has the kind of combat power or financial muscle to literally raise an army that could actually bring that country together. So that, I think, till the time that doesn't happen, and the only forces that can do it are external actors like Russia or the United States or something, and neither of them have the appetite nor the wherewithal right now to mount that kind of action. So I think in the short term, Syria is a lost case. It's just going to be this patchwork quilt of ethnicities of what possibly Afghanistan was pre-1996, unless by some miracle the manages to raise the resources to sweep through Syria and unify all of the various factions. I don't see that happening. So it is there will be an HTS Syria, there will be a Kurd Syria, there will be Alawite Syria, there will be a Druze Syria. All of that's what's going to happen, and that is worrisome because that allows all manner of jihadis to kind of go there and seek shelter and find inspiration and and spread their tentacles across the world. And that's the number one thing. That is the only reason I think a lot of the countries of the world should be worried primarily.
Yeah. And Abhijit, one of our viewers is already asking that. He's saying, Pakistanis are saying the Syrian jihadis will now come to Kashmir and fight the next battle. How true is that? And what is the impact on India?
Look, everybody knows that cocaine is very freely available in Islamabad, Peshawar, and all those places. I would just say control the cocaine, buddy. I know it flows like water out there, but please control. You see, they will be redeployed. First of all, we have to understand the civil war is not over. They are going to be fighting each other for control. You look at their own history of how they were fighting against each other, boss. Okay, they were killing more of each other than they were killing government soldiers. Theek. So, first, let us establish that. Second, Jolani, he's actually Golani, has put out a very interesting statement, made a very interesting statement. Nobody is our enemy, not even Israel. Specifically mentioned Israel, not even Israel. And we are going to, Assad was our only enemy. We want to live in peace. We would not have been able to achieve what we did without the Israelis hammering Hezbollah the way they did. He's actually said that. Now, Golani comes from the Golan. His family moved to Saudi Arabia after they were displaced by the Israeli annexation of the Golan in 67, the capture of the Golan in 67. So what ends up happening out here is you have this guy whose leadership is based on his jihadi credentials, now trying to act like this big peacemaker and I want peace with everybody. See, the leader may agree, but if the followers don't agree, what happens? Why did HTS split from Al-Nusra? Why did Al-Nusra split from ISIS, etc., etc.? It was all because there were a bunch of people who did not agree. You see this over and over again when somebody doesn't agree with the leader. In the case of Yitzhak Rabin, they did not agree with the peace. It was the follower who killed the leader. In the case of Michael Collins in Ireland, they didn't agree with the standstill agreement with the English. And so the IRA killed them. In India, it was a once devout follower of Mahatma Gandhi who thought he was God, who then killed Mahatma Gandhi. Mohandas Karamchand, sorry, not Mahatma. So this is, all of this is fine. The proof of the pudding lies in the eating. And I can honestly tell you, if anybody thinks they know what is going to happen with Syria, they are living in fool's paradise. There is a possibility of coming to Kashmir, maybe, if Syria calms down first. It could be. Maybe in 1 year's time, Syria will be all brotherhood, peace, and LGBTQ rights. I fully expect Jolani to be heading the Damascus Pride Parade wearing a negligee and bra next year. He may. So congratulations to him.
But
I mean, if Zelensky.
We're actually seeing in action something that you've been saying for a long time, which is the liberals. And let's be real, this is the Democrats in the US who have orchestrated this. And the Islamists have a nexus. And this result is really an on-the-ground consequence of that nexus, isn't it?
But they've always had that nexus. Do you know, Tehran? Do you know, Advaita, Tehran is the sex change capital of the Muslim world. It so happened that when the Islamic Revolution happened and homosexuality was banned, amongst other things, this follower of Khomeini, who was taking hormones for breast growth, ran into Khomeini's room and opened his shirt. And because of the hormones, the breasts had become very large. He said, in what plan of God am I a man? And so Khomeini said, fine, homosexuality is banned, but if you transition to being a woman, you can marry the man you want. To this day, Iran subsidizes sex change operations. If you are a homosexual, you will be killed. But if you transition and mutilate your genitals and become the other sex, and are with your lover in a make-believe heterosexual relationship, it's fine. Isn't it curious that the Democrats who love this kind of thing and want you to see the nuance in jihadism and Islamism are the ones who now have this exact same point of view that children who are gay should be allowed to transition and become women? Right? No, Sunnypad, it isn't just with Sunnis. Remember, they were the ones who wanted the deal with Iran and signed the nuclear deal with Iran and tried to rehabilitate it and bring it back. So it's one of those things where intersectionality, you will find the most bizarre, strange things to bring people together. Like many of us have said, chickens for KFC. It is, you know how watching a movie is meant to be the brief suspension of disbelief. Uh, Becoming a Democrat and joining this great Democrat liberandu world is a brief suspension of your synaptic abilities, or maybe a prolonged one.
Professor, Assad's regime was providing a passage to arms, ammunition, reinforcements through Iran to the Gaza resistance, as they call it. This is now finished. It's over. It's not going to happen anymore. So, what happens
No.
to the Palestinian movement?
Look, the Palestinian movement, in a sense, I mean, after what has happened in Gaza, there's not much of a Palestinian movement any longer. I think Syria had a far more significant role when it came to passage of arms to the Hezbollah, but there isn't much of a Hezbollah any longer. Look, that's over, uh, or not. For example, you never know what's going to happen. Will the jihadi change spots? The fact remains that this lot of jihadi are, I think, after 10 to 15 years of fighting, they're possibly more realistic. They know that there are limits to what they can do. On the north, they have the Kurds. The Kurds may not want to go to Damascus, but the Kurds are maybe satisfied with what they are. But if the jihadis try to explain area of influence, the Kurds will head back and head back hard. To the south, you have the Druzes and their allies. They also don't give any sign that they want to go into Damascus. But to come through to Lebanon, they have to come through the Druzes, and there again they'll run into a particular problem. So the ability of the jihadis to now arm people in Lebanon or Palestine against the Israelis at this point in time is somewhat limited. I believe they don't have the appetite for this at this point in time right now. They've won a battle without much fighting. They won a battle which had a lot of coordination. For example, Jolani says that he was in discussions with the Prime Minister of Syria, who was appointed by Assad for a long period of time. Given the efficiency of the Mukhabrat, that is the Syrian intelligence, this could not have happened without Assad knowing and Assad approving. So what has happened has been a negotiated settlement where at this point in time, everybody is playing their part in a script given to them by the Americans and agreed to by the Russians. That script at this point in time does not include arming Israel's enemies, because that script in part also has been written by the Israelis. So I don't think, Assad in his weakened state was not able to do much. Now with Assad gone, Hezbollah gone, Gaza gone, I think that is one chapter that has been closed for quite some time now.
Okay. Sandeep, what do you think? Do you think the Palestinian cause was really just sacrificed in this kind of need to diminish Shia prominence? And it's really about the Sunni Shia battle more than anything else in the region. And Palestine was just a casualty that they were ready to have.
I think so, because as it went along, they found Israel quite unbending. So nobody knew that they could never have kind of prevailed over Israel to take any soft line, rather than therefore letting Israel and Palestine directly sort it out, which had its other implications politically domestic in the domestic politics of the US and elsewhere. If they were to just let that fact run out, this is a very, very, I think, indirect way of making Palestine the casualty, as we say, by killing the snake without breaking the stick or the rod. So that this is, I think, a very, very high order of diplomacy. And this probably something the Democrats wanted to deliver before giving up office, rather than leave it to Mr. Trump to do it after he takes over and get the kudos for it. And so that is where I think, maybe the so-called deep state we were discussing yesterday is trying to salvage a bit of its what do you call respectability to some extent.
But if it goes
Yeah,
south,
Sandeep, a lot of strange things. Sandeep, a lot of strange things have been happening in Syria as well. This lady called Luna al-Shulb, who was known as the second lady of Syria, the head of Assad's media wing, and she was killed in a very strange car accident in July. And she was a Druze. And, so there were sort of some pieces on the chessboard being moved around. She was an extremely influential figure there and had direct contact with Assad. So do you think, this has been in the works for a while? I would assume it would have to be.
Of course, of course, of course. They would have been preparing the ground for it. Whether it was done as a plan B to begin with. They were working on a plan B, and whether the plan B at some stage was converted into plan A. That's, I think, a matter of speculation. But what I found interesting
Yeah.
earlier, some of us commented that, yeah, this also would have been agreed, the script would have been agreed by Russia. So whether I don't know whether that is an independent agreement with Russia, or there was some kind of a triangular thing that I think both Abhijit and Sandeep and Professor can comment on.
Yeah,
Whether Russia was
that's
party to
why
the
I'll
thing
ask
or not.
Sandeep. Yeah, Sandeep, let me get to Sandeep Unnithan on this one. Sandeep, that was the thing also. This lady, Luna al-Shab, was supposed to be, the criticism that she received very often was that she's a Russian kind of person on the inside.
Yeah, possibly, Advaita. And the Russians have huge stakes in Syria. And from what we're hearing now is they've struck an agreement with this new government to retain their bases in Kamayim, that's the air base, and Tartus, which is the naval base. And Tartus is the most important naval base that the Russian Federation has outside of Russia and the former Soviet Union, states of the former Soviet Union. And initially there were reports that, the Russian Navy has moved out, but it now seems that all the ships are still, in place. And Kamayam is a very important airbase because it's a staging point between the flights that fly out of Africa, where the Russian state has a lot of interest in. So there are literally flights that are going out of Chad and all of these other places in Africa, flying via Kamayam. So that's like a very critical place for them. So this is possibly in this negotiated settlement that the Russians were part of. This would have been one of those main things on the agenda, that you'll allow us to keep our bases. We don't care who comes to power. Assad is going to be back in Russia, but we want to hold on to our bases. So that's the settlement. That's the deal that they've had. And, and when I'm just thinking about all you're talking about the liberal, joy about the revolution and all that. I'm just thinking, the color revolution thing. You've seen Jurassic Park, the second one, The Lost World. There's this Jeff Goldblum's character in that. When all those guys, they see the dinosaurs for the first time, they're all going ooh and they're going ah and all that. So this guy who's seen it in the first part, he says, that's how it all begins. In the beginning, there's ooh and there's ah, and then there's running and then there's screaming. This is what is going to happen. And this is exactly how it plays.
No, and it's so absurd because for the last 14 months, you've been going on about Gaza without realizing that this is like a death blow to that movement over there, because these people are now really further isolated. Yes. I don't understand, how they don't understand these things when they're celebrating a radical.
The man of the moment, Advaita, is Benjamin Netanyahu. You look at him since October 7th, 2023. The man has crushed Hamas. He's crushed Hezbollah. He's made Iran defenseless. Iran would probably be reaching for its nukes, as Abhijit said. They would want to become a nuclear power really over the weekend now. And he's got rid of the House of Assad, which has been a fixture for half a century. So, Benjamin, and he's already on the Golan. His army is on the move. It's biting off chunks of southeastern Syria as we speak. So, I mean, it's full marks to BB. It's BB number one.
And he's maybe number
Abhijit,
one.
Abhijit, Abhijit, what's going to happen? I'm a little worried about the Kurds because the Kurds aren't liked by anybody. Right now, they're doing something very important for the world, which is they're housing and guarding the most fierce of ISIS fighters in that jail that they have, with American support, of course. But how long is that going to last? And if the sympathies of this new ruler are with ISIS, what are the odds that, like he's freed other people from jail saying they're political prisoners, these ISIS fighters may also be political prisoners?
You see, there are only two immutable laws in history. The first is you never invade Russia from the west. You can invade it from the east like Genghis Khan did and get away with it, but you never invade it from the west. And the second law is no matter who's involved, the Kurds always get screwed. They're the only other people who get screwed than the Palestinians. No matter what happens, the Palestinians get screwed, and the Kurds have been getting screwed since before the Palestinians were getting screwed. Even the most famous Kurdi leader in history, Salahuddin Ayyubi, what known as Saladin, who fought King Richard for Jerusalem. Even he screwed over his own people. So you see, it is going by the historical dictum. The Kurds will get screwed.
That's sad, though.
I think that will depend on the Kurds themselves. If the Kurds give an impression that they are trying to go for an independent state, then you will have the Turks, you will have the Iraqis, as well as the Iranians, everybody going against them. I think they have to keep their ambitions in check. This is a card that they have been dealt by geography and fate. And this is something that you have to live with. As long as they keep their ambitions in check, don't overstep certain boundaries and make it difficult for the Americans to basically, protect them from the Turks, I think it may not go very badly for the Kurds. So the Kurds will have to play this particular measure. And one of the things that the Kurds of Syria have done is basically say, look, we belong to Syria. Syria is a polyethnic state. After all, by one account, 50% of Syria is Arabic, 50% belongs to other minorities, other linguistic and ethnic minorities. So the Kurds of Syria have been extremely clever and wise to play this up, that we want to be part of a Syria, which is basically a multi-ethnic state, a federal state. And the only thing standing against this is Assad. The Arabization of Syria, especially North Syria, was carried out by the father. So if we want to have a polyethnic state, Assad may go. So this is a stance that resonates well with everybody. The problem is the following. Will HTS, which has just taken over Damascus and therefore is seen to be the ruler of Syria, although it is not, will they accept this? Or will they use Turkish fears, Turkish insecurities about Kurds becoming autonomous to basically try and crush the Kurds? This is, I think, something that has to be seen. At this point in time, what I see is the HTS knows that the powers of overplaying their hand can be fatal. Abhijit said, can the leader go against his followers? I think the followers, in a sense, having gotten battered after their initial successes in the Levant, they know where the score lies. That if they overindulge themselves, they'll get hammered like nobody's business. Arms will be given to other factions to kill them. So I think at this point in time, they will keep their ambitions in check. Will we sing Kumbaya? Probably not. But I think for the Kurds, for the Syrians, let us be hopeful. Let us hope that the Americans and the Russians have learned their lessons and they are able to bring everybody together. Because at this point in time, except for the Iranians, everybody's happy.
Okay, AIM, I want to ask you this because the Americans are very unreliable, right? They can,
Yeah.
tomorrow, Trump can come in and Trump has already made it very clear that this is not our problem. It's not our issue. We don't need to be involved there. So, what's stopping the Americans from just kind of saying, okay, January 20th, 2025, we're done with Syria?
So, this is the sort of, once you're in it, you can't get out of it. Right?
So, that's what they said about
It's
Afghanistan.
Yeah, but they never let Trump get out of Afghanistan, remember? They waited to come when they went on saying, no, 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 you can't, you can't, you can't. And then they come, they leave. So now let's see if this Trump administration is going to be bogged down, hemmed in, whatever term you want to use. But the problem is Trump is committed to Israel's security. Okay. And Israel's security in that sense demands that Syria be stable or a manageable instability. Right? That being the case, America might generally stay out of it like they did during the Trump administration. There'll be, Trump carried out some Naam ke Vaste bombings of a Syrian airbase here, a Syrian airbase there, just to show that, he was sticking to policy and things like that.
And that was
In
ISIS
this
era
case,
also,
I think,
that time.
remember here, the problem is more serious in that there is several factions involved in this takeover. Okay, you can never rule out infighting because we always assume that this has been people will do what is in their interests. Very frequently, people do not do what is in their interests. Right? Never assume rationality where none exists. And this is where I'm going to push back to what Dipankar said and what Suhail said before he left. Had Putin done a deal, he would be the single most stupid man to exist in international politics at the moment. Remember, he withdrew prematurely his troops outside Kiev that were blockading Kiev in anticipation of a deal of a ceasefire that was to be signed in Istanbul, and that deal was never signed after those Russian troops withdrew. This is the same man, when he was prime minister, oversaw Russia agreeing with the Libya ceasefire resolution, which America, France, and Britain immediately turned around and say there can be ceasefire actually means regime change because there can be no ceasefire without regime change, and they turned it into regime change. So he's been made a Mickey of in Libya. He's been made a Mickey of in Kiev. His biggest this thing is that they negotiated the breakup of the USSR and the ending of Warsaw Pact without any written guarantees of NATO eastward expansion. Because even the documents that have come out showed that America promised it, but it was verbal promises. It was never a written promise in any form. Okay, so if it is his biggest cross to bear what Gorbachev did, his own record in Libya, plus his own record in Kiev, if he's fallen for this the fourth time around, then, I've had serious doubts about his stability since he invaded Ukraine. I don't know why he did it. I still don't.
But
and tell me, what are the odds? Do you think it could be something like this, that we get out of supporting Assad in Syria, and you kind of get this Ukraine situation to close? Either Crimea stays with us, or they say no NATO. Do you think there could have been some deal like this?
So Advaita, the point I'm making is exactly what you said. America is so unreliable. They've gone back on every deal. Why do you believe they will stick to this deal? What guarantees do you have they'll stick to this deal? Even this agreement to retain the Tartus naval base and the Al Khamim air base. Tomorrow, 6 months down the line, what if the government says get out? You see, the treaty for Tartus and Khamim says it is only by mutual agreement. Unlike the Guantanamo Bay base agreement with Cuba, which does not have a timeout period, or the Diego Garcia agreement with between America and Britain, where America gets to decide when to break it. Britain and Cuba don't. This is why, even though Cuba is a sworn enemy of America, they've not been able to kick out Guantanamo Bay or even use lawfare to kick them out of Guantanamo Bay. Russia does not have these cast iron agreements. You understand? So they can't. Tomorrow they may just cut off water supply and power supply to Tartus and Al Khamim. Al Khamim is landlocked. There's nothing you can do if the Syrians say, sorry, but no electricity, no water, no overflight.
2 points.
Sandeep,
With Tartus, the amount of infrastructure you would have to keep shipping through the Sea of Marmara and the Bosphorus is insane. It would not make any logistical sense.
2 points. Just
Sandeep, Unnithan, this thing that, I'll come to you, Professor. I just want to ask Sandeep this question. One of the, what is being said is that one of the biggest losers of this entire situation as a country is also China, because their Silk Road initiative is now at a full stop. What do you make of this? I mean, is China really hit that bad? And of course, the Americans are going to let the Chinese have that Silk Road.
Yeah, well, actually, it does, Advaita. And in fact, if the Qataris play their cards well, they could actually have that gas pipeline, the Qataris and the Turkish gas pipeline to Europe. That becomes a reality, and that would be a game changer in the region. If there is some kind of settlement, if there's some peace and stability, then you would actually see the Qataris and the Turks working on that pipeline to go to Europe, because as Europe moves away from Russian gas, the Qataris, I think the Qataris are the third largest oil gas reserves in the world, third or the fourth largest. That pipeline project becomes very attractive. So I think that is something that we're looking at very closely. Abhijit can probably fill in on this. While the Chinese might have taken a beating, that's when the Qataris enter the game. I'm very curious to know what the Qataris think of what's going on in Syria right now.
Brings me back. Sandeep, this brings me back to that point that the Gazans have been pretty much abandoned, because it was just recently that we read that Qatar has asked, Hamas leaders to leave.
Yes. And the Qataris also hosted the Doha round
credence
2 days
to this
before.
being all
Yeah. So they also hosted that very significant meeting between the Turks, the Russians, and who else was there? There was a third party there in the Doha round last week, just before these. That's where they say that the agreement was basically reached, and what happens, what's going on in Syria right now is a consequence. Doha, that's right. Lavrov was there.
Yeah, Lavrov is there. Yeah.
Right. So the Qataris are possibly in on this. It'll be interesting to see which way they are headed, because I think there's very little that happens in the Middle East without them knowing about it or having played a role in it or facilitated this agreement. So interesting times ahead, Advaita. Qatar. आप कतार में हैं?
Qatar. Yes, go ahead, Professor.
Coming back to what Abhijit said, look, I mean, Putin on Syria right now was basically the Russians on Syria are negotiating from a position of weakness. And if you agree, bargain from a position of weakness, you basically go with whatever commitments you get. But having said this, let me tell you this. Suppose tomorrow the Syrians do something stupid, like blockading those bases or denying them water, something like that. You do something stupid. The Russians may do something deliberate. The Russians, in a sense, are unpredictable. For example, what they did in Ukraine, you would argue is disproportionate to their security concerns. Okay, but the Russians do it. And therefore, I think for a regime in Syria, unsure about its stability, to make enemies out of Russia would be a foolish thing to do. So it's quite possible that that they basically
the Russians. Yeah, Professor, 1 minute, very quickly. AIM is leaving. AIM, one last question to you before you leave. Jolani was actually, sort of very close to Zarqawi, and also the number two, where Baghdadi was very impressed with him as a jihadi. So, any comments on that, and then you can leave.
Like I said, a leopard can't change its spots, buddy. If you believe that
Okay.
Jaish-e-Mohammed and Hizbul Mujahideen are ideologically driven different factions, congratulations to you. I ain't drinking that Kool-Aid. Ta-ta.
All right. Where are you going? Where are you going, Abhijit? Oh, too
By the
busy.
way,
So I think we should wrap this up. I think Sandeep Ghose gets the last word. Go ahead, Professor.
Jolani's father had leftist inclinations. You know, he had leftist
Jolani is
inclinations.
actually from a very wealthy background. He's a rich
I'm
kid.
not sure about the wealthy background, but his father had leftist inclinations once upon. But then, Gulbuddin Hikmatyar also started off as a Maoist, and then he became Mujahideen Jihadi. It's another matter. As for China, I think China's economic interests are so vast that Syria is small beer. And as for the oil pipeline through Syria, any unstable energy pipeline through any unstable region is a pipe dream. That's not going to happen for a long period of time.
Okay. So that's all we have time for, folks. It's been a great conversation. Thank you to my panelists for joining in today. And we had great viewership, Sandeep Ghosh. You'll be happy to know. Over nearly 1,400 viewers at one point of time, which is great for a weekday. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.
We cannot end without remembering Pallavi Ghosh. Why is she ducking today? It's because, like, she deleted her tweet. She's gone underground after the tweet about her ex-boss, or what's really happened?
I don't know. She says, I'm not really that well versed in Syria. So if we were discussing Rahul Gandhi today and the shenanigans in Parliament, Pallavi would have been here. So maybe we'll, try and get back to that maybe tomorrow if something interesting happens. And Sandeep Unnithan was only going to be here for half an hour, but he stuck around the full hour. So I'm assuming he had fun. He doesn't look like he has a lot of fun.
It is a riveting discussion. Thanks so much. It was very, very enlightening for me. Really Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, and catch you all soon. Remember to like, share, subscribe, share the conversation with your friends. Do work on the comments. I mean, I'm not putting you guys to work like I do everyone else, but do leave a comment so it helps with the algorithm. And you all have to contribute to my personal success. That's very important. That's what community is about. And so
all the best.
Thank you, everybody, and we will see you soon. Bye for now. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Sandeep Unnithan. You can smile now. It's over.